Welcome, everyone. Good to see everybody. How's it going today? How's it going today? All right, that's what I like to hear. Let's get a little energy in the crowd for us. I'd like to invite our president, Dr. McClyman, to come forward and welcome everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, first of all, thank you all for coming. I think we've hit the tail end of midterms and we're heading into spring break. So I do not take for granted that you're all here. It is wonderful to have you all here. Tonight's Rikard Lecture brings us a voice shaping national conversations about the business of college athletics. Kristi Dosh, a 2003 alumna, has become a leading authority in a field that blends law, finance, athletics, and public policy. Her work shows how Oglethorpe graduates use broad, rigorous learning to create real-world impact. This lecture series has deep roots at Oglethorpe. We have a long history of engaging students in business and commerce education, dating back to our early years in Atlanta. That tradition later inspired the creation of the Hammock School of Business, made possible by a transformational gift from alumnus Bill Hammock. His investment strengthened our commitment to preparing students for complex and evolving industries. The Rikard Lecture Series honors Mack A. Rikard, class of 1937. Who supported Oglethorpe athletics and student scholarships throughout his life. His generosity made events like this one possible. He believed in connecting students with leaders who bring insight, integrity, and vision to their work. Tonight's lecture reflects this kind of opportunity, the opportunity that Mr. Rikard and Mr. Hammock together hoped their support would create. Kristi Dosh embodies that spirit. She founded businessofcollegesports.com. She wrote 2 books on the economics of college sports. She advises universities nationwide on name, image, and likeness policy. She built a career that requires sharp analysis and ethical clarity, and her path began here. She worked with faculty who challenged her to think critically and to communicate with confidence. Those habits of mind sit at the heart of an Oglethorpe education. Our students share that foundation. They learn to cross disciplines, they learn to ask precise and challenging questions, they learn to lead in fields that shift quickly. Kristi shows them what's possible when talent meets opportunity, and when a liberal arts education meets a rapidly challenging and changing world. So tonight, we continue a legacy of connecting students with professionals who challenge assumptions and open new doors. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Kristi Dosh back to Oglethorpe University.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you very much for being here. We greatly appreciate it. Perhaps if you would start and maybe tell us a little bit about your Oglethorpe journey, how you discovered us and how you came to be a student here and ultimately a graduate.
Yeah, so I transferred into Oglethorpe, and so I always say I have something to compare it to. I won't talk poorly about the other institution, but it was a much larger institution in a much smaller town, and I did not enjoy either of those things. I didn't like sitting in the back of a classroom with 100, 150 other students. When I would go see my professor and they had no idea I was even in one of their classes, I guess something you can appreciate about that anonymity because you can sit in the back of the class and never get called on. But I was telling some student athletes earlier today when they asked me, what I sort of appreciate the most about my Oglethorpe education. And I said, really, it's 2 things. I became a much better writer here. You have to write a lot here, at least you did when I was here. And I think it made me a better writer.
You still do.
And so even though I wasn't a journalism major, I've been able to go into a job in journalism and publish multiple books, fiction and nonfiction. And I think in large part because I became a better writer here, and writing is really central to law school. And so I was not intimidated by the amount of writing we had to do in law school because we had done more here. But I was in school with people who had gone to large state universities. And not only were they not used to so much writing because they had just taken Scantron tests, because I teach now, if you're teaching 200 people, you don't want to grade 200 written assignments, you want to grade a Scantron. But also they were afraid to be called on in class. And law school is all about the Socratic method, which means the professor gets up front, they don't teach anything, they just start calling on people, and you essentially teach your classmates as you go. And these people were terrified of it. And I thought, well, I took classes over in Hearst. I remember being at a round table, and I think there were 8 of us in the classroom. So you had to have done the work. You were going to have to talk in class. And, I think those things prepared me really well, not only for law school, but for many of the things that I've done since then. And so I'm very happy that I transferred here. I got to have 3 wonderful years here. And I always say my biggest regret is that I didn't get to have all 4 years here.
Well, for the record, we do not have a Scantron machine anywhere in the Hammond School of Business, just so you know. So for you have literally written the book on name, image, likeness, on NIL. For the uninitiated, what is NIL and what has happened to put this at the forefront and center of college sports?
Okay, so all of us have what's known as a right of publicity. Every single one of us has the ability to protect and to monetize our name, image, and likeness, unless you were a college athlete prior to July 1st, 2021, or the NAIA before October 1st, 2020. Student athletes gave up that ability. And much of the reason behind that was I think no one in the system could really figure out how could you allow a student athlete to make money on their name, image, and likeness, but not be paid to go to a certain school or play at a certain school. We see how that all is playing out, but that's for another question. So name, image, and likeness is the ability of college athletes to monetize their name, image, or likeness. They can do this through a brand paying them to post on social media. They can get paid for a speaking engagement with a booster club. They can create their own merchandise and sell it. They can write books and make money off of it. They can perform music and make money. They can teach camps and clinics and lessons. There's dozens of ways that they can monetize their name, image, and likeness that they weren't allowed to do before. I was telling the student athletes here earlier today, I played softball my whole life. As you know, Oglethorpe does not have a softball team, so I did not play here, but I coached for a year over at Marist as a pitching coach and 2 years at Dunwoody High School, and I taught private lessons, and I was allowed to make money from doing that. I would not have been able to make money if I had been playing college softball. They were not allowed to make money teaching lessons or coaching youth. And so that has all changed. And now we see student athletes across all 3 divisions and NAIA, even the junior colleges, who are now monetizing their name, image, and likeness. Sometimes in small amounts, sometimes in very large amounts if you play football or basketball at certain schools.
So can you tell us, one of the things you hear a lot in the press when this subject comes up is the role of NIL collective. Can you tell us what that is, what they do, and what their part is in this whole process?
So a collective is usually a group of alumni or boosters of a specific institution who have come together and formed an organization. Usually it is an actual company, an LLC that they have formed, and they are going to try to find more name, image, and likeness opportunities for the athletes at that school. There are a few exceptions. There was a collective that served all HBCU schools, and there was a collective I can think of off the top of my head that served multiple women's gymnastics programs. But for the most part, collectives are formed for individual schools. So I teach at University of Florida. We have one called Florida Victorious, and they work with athletes across all the sports. Not every athlete, but they do work with athletes in every sport. And they'll do things like, I know they had a group of gymnasts that they organized to go and do an escape room with a bachelorette party. And the bachelorette party was paying extra to do the escape room with the University of Florida women's gymnastics team. I can't tell you why. They had some motivation behind that, but they do.
Well, I would imagine if you're a gymnast, you're pretty good at escaping. That would be like
maybe. They do fan fest events. They did an event that was some sort of like vaccine awareness drive at CBS. They do some interesting sort of things. They help them create merchandise that they sell. And at big institutions like University of Florida that play at the highest level of college football and college basketball, they often sign very large deals with athletes in the millions of dollars sometimes for a number of different things. I've reviewed the contracts, and there'll be like a 2-page list of, they call them deliverables, items they have to sign, events they have to show up for, posts they have to put on social media. They'll connect them with brands for a number of deals. And these are now becoming part of the financial package that athletes are being offered when they sign at the particularly Division I level, at the FBS football level, where they are getting revenue sharing money directly from the institution, plus some sort of contract from the collective. This has gotten messy as of lately. The NCAA had to remind them recently that those contracts with collectives that were guaranteed money, there had to be real NIL deals behind that. You couldn't just say, we're going to pay you $4 million. We'll figure out what it's for later. You had to have specific things. If you were going to match them up with brands, you had to already know who those were. So we're still seeing a lot of change in that space, but essentially collectives are trying to procure more NIL deals for athletes. It's not supposed to be to induce them to go to that institution, but it's to induce them to go to that institution.
So there's certainly major critics of NIL, retired Alabama coach Nick Saban being one of the more prominently and bigger voices who argue that the NIL and accompanying money has created chaos and instability through the transfer portal. How do you assess that concern, and what is your take on that kind of concern?
So I tell people, in my mind, there's sort of 2 different discussions to be had about NIL. There's football and men's basketball at the highest level over here, and then there's everything else over here. It's 2 really different worlds. When I'm working with gymnasts at University of Florida, that looks really different than the experience a football player at University of Florida is having. The transfer portal exists for all sports, but the sports where we see collectives and universities having the most sway over athletes, I guess I would say, is football, men's basketball, and to a smaller degree, women's basketball and baseball kind of come into play there as well. And the fact that NIL happened at the same time that sort of free movement for transferring occurred. Previously, if you transferred, you could transfer once. You would have to thereafter sit out for a year if you transferred, and you didn't see as many transfers happening. Now it's like free agency every single year. I was looking at an athlete's resume the other day who has played at 4 different schools now, which I think will look really interesting to an employer when they look and they're like, why have you been at, if they don't follow college sports, they're going to wonder, why'd you transfer every year? But NIL is playing a huge role in these transfer decisions now, to the point where I was on a panel with a former head football coach just about a month ago, and he was saying that if you don't already know where you're going when the transfer portal happens, you're probably not going anywhere, because these deals are being made before it opens, which is not how it's supposed to work. You are not supposed to be talking to coaches from another school before the transfer portal opens. But the sort of workaround that was happening was agents were talking to the general managers of programs as sort of a workaround, and they were getting deals worked out before the transfer portal even opened. Now, just in the last few weeks, the NCAA has issued guidance saying no one who represents an athlete is supposed to be talking to other schools until the transfer portal opens. So we'll see if they start reining that in. But what's happening is athletes who are following the rules and are entering the transfer portal when it opens and are just sort of like testing the waters. The problem is they're giving up their scholarship at the school they're leaving, and they're not guaranteed to get picked up by another school. And we're seeing across sports thousands of athletes getting left in the transfer portal and now having no home. They've lost their spot at their old school and no new school picked them up. And so I think there's going to have to be some changes, because it's not positive things that are happening to student athletes as we've moved into this new era.
So you made a distinction in your prior answer about what's happening with football and athletics that I presume is focused on those sports that have major TV contracts. What does this look like for students below the D1 level and maybe outside of those very elite schools that are going to result in a very high dollar amount for NIL?
Yeah, I've seen incredible things happen for athletes in other sports and across all three divisions and NAIA. Athletes who came into NIL already having a large social media following were at a bit of an advantage. I was telling the student athletes I met with earlier today, technically the first athlete to monetize their name, image, likeness was a volleyball athlete at an NAIA school named Chloe Mitchell. Chloe grew a huge social media following during 2020. With a DIY she shed project in her backyard. And I believe when NIL began, she had something like 1.2 million followers. And pretty quickly, she had deals with Target and Home Depot and Ford and all these large companies, to the point where at the end of the first year of NIL, she had made 7 figures and she left college. She did not finish her student athlete career or her college career because she was running her own 7-figure business and felt like she was learning more on the job than she was in school. And I'm not advocating that anybody do that, but
We are not advocating anybody do that.
I don't think we have anybody here making 7 figures. I could be wrong, but you
Yeah.
know, Chloe was in a unique position because she had a large following coming in. The Cavender twins had a huge following coming in. You know, there were some athletes who had that built-in advantage, but I've also seen plenty of athletes who came in with 1,500 followers or 5,000 followers who were able to start doing brand deals. Some of it was for free stuff, and I was telling the athletes earlier today, you know, some free stuff is worth it. If a cosmetic brand is offering you an $8 lipstick and you've got to like shoot 2 videos and 5 still photographs, probably not worth it. But one of the deals I've done, and I've now worked with this company 3 different times, is a company called Chili Pad. And it's like a mattress topper that you can control the temperature of. And I sleep hotter than my husband, so it's only on my half of the bed and you can set the temperature. And so I can make my side of the bed really cold. And I love this thing. It's like $1,000. I would never buy this thing for myself. I just wouldn't. But the company offered it to me for free to try it out and talk about it. And then I fell in love with it. And over the last 12 years, I'm on my 3rd one now. As they have died, I ask for a new one and they give me a new one. And I post about it once or twice and I get to keep this, you know, $1,000 product. That's worth it when you're getting free product and it's something you're actually going to use. You know, cash is nice too. And we've seen athletes at every level who are doing cash deals as well, or they're making money doing something like camps and clinics and lessons like I talked about earlier. You guys have Lainey Higgins here, who I'm going to embarrass and talk about. Lainey ended up in my book that I wrote on NIL because I think that she is one of maybe 3 D3 athletes I can name off the top of my head who have really taken advantage of NIL and been able to sort of outperform what I think people would expect somebody at the D3 level would do. Lainey got a deal with Lululemon. Her pitch for that is in my book, so you can actually see what she sent to Lululemon. I know D1 athletes with 1 million followers who would have loved to work with Lululemon that still haven't. And Lainey worked with Lululemon. She goes to a school that when I tell people I went here, they always say, I've never heard of it. And when I was here, we always said, well, it's never heard of you either. You know, and I tell this story.
Somebody
all the
make
time.
a T-shirt with that on it.
I think we
like
did
that.
have a T-shirt at one point. We need to bring it back. But I tell people about Lainey all the time. There's a D3 football player named Jack Betts. He's graduated now, and Jack Betts did something like 55 deals his first 18 months of NIL, because he was willing to reach out to brands and talk to them about what he could do to get them in front of his audience, and didn't have a huge audience. I think Jack had a couple of thousand followers on Instagram. There was a track and field athlete at a D2 institution, Trevor Bassett. I think when I interviewed him the first time, he had something like 2,500 followers. Not only did he do some deals while he was in college, he did it with the express intention of forming relationships with brands in the track and field space so that he could go pro in track after graduation. Trevor competed in the last Olympics, and many of those sponsors did follow him from college. So, you know, I've seen athletes in these other sports be able to not only earn money while they're in college, I've seen quite a few of them be able to take these relationships and the skills they gain for some of these NIL deals into life after graduation. And it's changed the course of their careers in really incredible ways.
So for those students who, student athletes who are at the big time sports, what kind of opportunities are there? Is that the star quarterback? Is it across the board? What kind of differential, if you are at sort of the major, or maybe put the question another way, are there athletes at these major programs that are not pursuing NIL deals?
There are, but I would say it's athletes who don't want to. I mean, I have this conversation sometimes with athletes who take my NIL class, and they feel like they should be doing NIL because it exists. Some of them even talk to me about like feeling guilty that athletes before them couldn't do it, so they feel like they have to do it because they can. Some of them, their parents are pressuring them that they should be making NIL money. I run a parents Facebook group, and I have parents of 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds in there who want their kids to be doing NIL deals. I do not advocate for that, but they just join the group. But then I do have really entrepreneurial athletes who are 13, 14, who they went to their parents and said, I want to do NIL deals. I want to approach my gym about, doing something with them. And I think if the athlete initiates it, then great. But parents of 8-year-olds, I don't think it's a great idea. But I see that even at the college level. They'll take my class and be like, my mom and dad want me to do more NIL deals. And I always tell athletes, any of these NIL deals take time. It takes time to reach out to the company to negotiate the deal. It takes time to actually do whatever the activity is. For many of these deals, you have to have been doing something consistently. Like Lainey's Lululemon deal, that's for an Instagram series she was doing. And that's something, were you doing it once a week? Yeah. Okay. She was creating content once a week with this series. It takes real effort to be able to monetize your name, image, and likeness. And I had an athlete ask me today, he was like, how do I fit this in with my classes and my sport and, all these things I'm already doing? And I said, well, in some instances you don't, you don't have to. I always tell athletes, look at the things you're already doing. And is there a way to monetize something that's already part of your schedule, already a hobby you engage in? And generally that makes the most sense. But for some athletes, you can't fit it in, particularly when you're in season.
Thank you. So one of the issues that I've heard you raise and speak on is the issue of unregistered and unregulated agents in collegiate sports. Can you help us understand what's the concern, what's happening now, and what would registration and some level of regulation mean, and how would it affect athletes?
So this is super frustrating to me. The NCAA has asked me to have 3 different calls with them over the last 5 years about this and still done nothing. So I clearly have not convinced them what a problem this is. Any of you can walk out this door today when we get done and start telling people you're an NIL agent. That's it. That's all it takes. There's no registration. There's no requirement. Anyone can claim to be an NIL agent. And I'm not sure that all college athletes truly understand that. And so we see a lot of agents, in quotes, in this space who have no professional experience as agents, have no experience negotiating contracts, and yet are negotiating contracts. And it has become such an issue that last summer, the NBA asked me to come talk to their development league of high school athletes because they see athletes coming into the NBA and carrying sort of some problematic contracts with them. And in fact, I'm speaking at a summit this summer that's all folks from professional sports, because at the pro sports level, the Players Association is who monitors this. They all have some sort of application system. You usually have some pretty hefty fees that you pay to register, tests you have to take, bonds and insurance that you have to get. There's a process in pro sports to be an agent that sort of vets people on behalf of the athletes. And we don't have that at the college level right now. We have a lot of like dads and uncles who probably shouldn't be getting involved. I have college sophomores who pitch me and are like, I represent my friend on the basketball team and we've done this thing, and, I don't think you have to be an attorney to be an agent, but I'm not sure I've met a college sophomore yet who is well-versed enough in contracts to be negotiating them. Do we know some?
There might be some here.
There might. Okay. So it has become problematic. I'll give you an example. Marvin Harrison Jr. did not have a jersey his first year in the NFL because of a contract that was signed when he was in college that conflicted with the NFL Players Association's contract for apparel. It turned out actually that he didn't sign the contract. His dad forged his signature on the contract. And that's actually how they got out of the contract so that he could have a jersey in the NFL. So there are problems that are following athletes into their career. that's not even the worst one. I would say the worst one is there is a company that signed a lot of student athletes to advances, where they gave them advances on their NIL, and the repayment terms are absurd. And one of the players went to Florida, Jervon Dexter. It's public knowledge because he sued the company. They gave him something like $415,000 as an advance on his NIL, but he has to repay them 15% of every NFL contract for the next, I can't remember if it's 20 or 25 years, but NFL players, they don't play that long anyway. So just based on his rookie contract, he was going to owe them, I think it was $1.2 million on the 415 they advanced him.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in an ideal setting, what would agency be? How would that work? If you were sort of designing the system, how would you change the system, and what would be required to be an agent?
So fun full circle moment for me. I spent my one of my summers in law school at the WTA tour, the women's tennis tour, and they did not have an agent code, and they had a problem that most of their agents were represented by their parents because a lot of their players were teenagers, just by nature of professional tennis. And they had me pull the agent code from all of the pro leagues and write the first draft of their agent code. And when I did that, I never imagined we would be sitting here talking about college athletes, making money and having agents. But most of those codes and registration processes look pretty similar. So I think that college sports could have that. The NCAA has shown no real interest in getting involved in that, although they do have an agent code that has existed for quite some time around players who are represented for the various drafts as they're finishing college. But now we have the College Sports Commission. And I think that that's probably where this should end up living, is in the College Sports Commission. They are now over sort of all the NIL and revenue sharing related rules. And I think that that's probably where it should live. But they have something like 5 full-time employees right now, and that's it. So I don't think that they are well staffed enough to be handling it. But that's sort of my next idea. Since the NCAA hasn't done it yet, I'm going to start talking to them.
And you've mentioned revenue sharing several times. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what that looks like for the athletes?
Yeah, we're in our first year of revenue sharing. It's a result of a case, House v. NCAA, that got settled last year. And the result of that case is that Division I institutions can share revenue with student athletes up to $20.5 million per school. They can decide where to be in that. They can decide we can only afford to share $200,000 with our athletes. Or like you see in the Power Four, a school like University of Florida, they're sharing the full $20.5 million. So this is the first time in history that universities and athletic departments have been able to pay athletes directly. And it looks a little different at every school. At some schools, the contracts have a list of things the athlete has to do for that. Maybe social media posts they have to put up, or a commercial they have to take part in. I've seen some different stuff, but most of them don't have anything like that. They are sharing revenue with them just based on sort of it's supposed to be based on the value of their name, image, and likeness to the institution. But it very much is based on what position you play and how good you are at it.
And is that the result, or is that the other debate about collective bargaining? Is that for the revenue sharing? Is that related?
No, a little separate, in that there have long been movements towards athletes being deemed employees and able to collectively bargain. The proponents of this want athletes to be able to bargain for a salary cap, like this 20.5 that came out of the House case. Technically, someone could bring an antitrust lawsuit about that because it's an artificial cap that wasn't agreed to by essentially the labor in this situation. There hasn't been a case like that yet, but it's anticipated that there probably will be one. You hear coaches saying, like, we've got to put some, guardrails on this system. The revenue sharing cap is 20.5, but there's no cap on NIL money. So going back to that discussion we had about collectives, the university will offer, say, $4 million out of its rev share to the quarterback, and then the collective will offer another $2.5 million on top of that based on deals that they're gonna make with the athlete and between brands and the athlete. And so they're being offered a total package of $6.5 million. And you'll hear coaches, including Saban, say that there needs to be a cap on that outside NIL money. That would be an antitrust law violation. So that's why there isn't one. But if athletes were employees and they could collectively bargain, then you can have a cap. That's why we see a cap in professional sports, because those athletes are all employees. The Players Association collectively bargains with the league for things like the salary cap. So you can't put those sorts of things into play. It's really at this point difficult for the NCAA to put any sort of parameters around anything anymore without getting sued over an antitrust law violation, and collective bargaining would be the way around that.
Makes sense. So a legal question, and you can bill us for this if you need to. If an underage athlete's NIL is owned by the parent, can the athlete reclaim this as an adult? And what are the challenges, both ethical and legal, of the parents' involvement in the kids?
What is
NIL.
supposed to happen is that the parents can sign on behalf of the athlete before they turn 18. But once the athlete turns 18, they're supposed to essentially ratify the contract, either sign a new contract or sort of sign an addendum saying that now that they are 18, they agree to the terms of this contract. What we've seen in practice is that most contracts being signed by athletes who are under 18 are for really short time periods. And so it's not really going beyond their 18th birthday anyway. There are some cases of rev share contracts being signed by athletes who are 17 and entering college, and then that does have to be ratified by the student athlete when they turn 18. I haven't seen any that have been problematic yet, but in the end, a brand or a school cannot enforce a contract against someone who's underage, but the person who's underage can enforce it against the brand. So I actually do this problem in my sports media law class all the time with the age limit. And so if the brand doesn't pay you when they're supposed to, the 17-year-old athlete can sue the brand. But if the athlete doesn't deliver the 2 posts they were supposed to put up, the brand cannot enforce against the athlete until they turn 18.
Makes sense. So is NIL coming for high school athletics?
Yes, we're now at, I think, 41 or 42 states in the District of Columbia that allow NIL at the high school level. That was largely governed by state high school associations. There were a couple of states that had it in their state NIL law, like California, for example, specifically said high school athletes could participate in NIL when they passed their state law for college athletes. Mississippi, in contrast, in their state law said high school athletes cannot. Most state laws were silent about high school, and it was governed by the State High School Association. So then you got in some weird situations where some private high schools that weren't part of the State High School Association, their athletes could do NIL deals, but the public school athletes could not. And so you had athletes who were transferring schools to be able to participate in NIL. You also then started having athletes who were moving across state lines, because in the first couple of years, there were only a handful of states that allowed it. And actually, one of the sort of worst case scenarios happened with an athlete from Georgia who couldn't do NIL here in Georgia, and a coach and an agent in California convinced him and his dad that he should move to California where it was allowed, and they had already lined up NIL deals with him. And then he got out there, moved in, started school, and the State High School Association ruled him ineligible because they said he violated his rules about moving into the district. It took most of that school year to straighten that out and become eligible, and he missed a huge chunk of his junior year playing, which would impact, colleges being able to scout him and make him offers for college. And so the more that started to happen, I think the more pressure there was on state high school associations to allow it. And so now we're in a situation where most do allow it.
So what's coming next in the NIL space? What's the next big news item we should expect to see?
I think that we're in sort of a place of where NIL and revenue sharing is somewhat stable. I would think the biggest change coming is going to be around the transfer portal and around this idea of inducements and tampering, where colleges, coaches are talking to athletes at other schools outside of the transfer portal. Any of you who have followed it closely, Dabo Swinney at Clemson accused LSU of talking to one of its students after they were already on campus and had already started this semester. outside of the transfer portal and trying to lure him to LSU. There have been several claims of this. Wisconsin is actually suing University of Miami over a player named Xavier Lucas, who de-enrolled at Wisconsin and then enrolled at Miami, never entered the transfer portal, and was ready to start playing for Miami. That is still playing out in the courts. But the NCAA, just in the last few weeks, has said that they are pursuing multiple tampering cases right now. So I think that's kind of the next big movement is, will the NCAA institute any kind of punishments? Will they be against just the school and the coach, or will it also be against the athlete? And is there a way to really police that and stop the the tampering situation or not? Because we haven't seen the NCAA be real effective in policing anything.
So students, this is your warning. I'm going to, about 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you to come forward, start asking questions. So think through your questions and what you'd like to ask. Anyone in the audience who'd like to ask a question. It doesn't have to be students. So tell me, you have you left here, you went to law school, and you built a practice and a reputation in no small part through social media. Would you talk a little bit about what social media has and how it's impacted your career and your ability to build an audience?
Yeah, so I got on social media mostly because my first book publisher told me I had to be on social media. I was practicing law already. I was here in Atlanta, and I got a book deal based on an article I wrote in a law journal in law school. And after I signed the deal and we were sort of
That's not very common, is it?
No, it was a weird situation. There was a partner at my law firm who owned Baseball America, and he passed along my law journal article to the editor of Baseball America, who then passed it along to a book publisher he knew, and then they offered me a book deal. It is a weird way to get a book deal. Fun fact, that book has never been released. That is a long story. That was about the history of collective bargaining in Major League Baseball, and it's like 95% done. But anyway, long story. It was never released. But that publisher told me I had to get on Twitter. And at that point, Twitter was like a year old maybe. And I'm like, people get on, at that point, people like shared what they were eating for dinner. And I was like, why am I getting on Twitter? And he's like, you've got to build an audience. You need a platform. You've got to have people who are ready to buy the book when it comes out. And I'm like, okay. So I get on Twitter. I'm working in a law firm. I'm not doing anything related to sports. I was doing corporate law, and I had no idea what to post about, but I started following some other people in the sports space that I knew, and then tried to like mimic what they were posting about. But I ended up over time building a sizable following on Twitter, which led me to the agent who ended up getting me my job at ESPN as a sports business reporter. It led me to my second book deal for a book on the business of college sports. That book actually got published. And I always joke, if I was going to write a memoir, the subtitle of it has to be something about how Twitter changed my life, because I also met my husband on Twitter. My husband was a sports talk radio host here in Atlanta, and I heard him talking about something that I vehemently disagreed with one day, and I tweeted about how wrong he was, and he asked me out on a date. So my life has been changed by Twitter, both professionally and personally.
Wow. That we haven't heard that story here before. That's good for that. So in this age of long form video and social media, you have become a book author, not only in writing books about your professional life, but also some nonfiction books as well. I'm fiction and nonfiction, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I just had a cover reveal today for my next novel that comes out later this month. I love writing. I mean, that goes back to that's why Oglethorpe was probably a good fit for me, because I would rather write an essay than take a Scantron exam. So I sort of naturally moved towards, I was like one of the, first wave of bloggers. Blogging's not really cool anymore, but it was when I started. And that led me to getting hired by ESPN to be a sports business reporter. Even though I had no journalism background, I had been blogging for years at that point, and I had the book deals, and wrote the nonfiction and really enjoyed it. But I always in the back of my head wanted to write fiction, because I thought, I thought it would be easier. Spoiler alert, is not. But I thought, with nonfiction, you have to do all this research, and there's all these footnotes, and everything has to be factually correct. You get super nervous the day the book comes out, because you think there's something you missed that someone's going to catch and tell you were wrong, because that's what people love to do on Twitter. And so I would get super nervous when it would come out, and I would think fiction's so easy. You get to just make it all up. And then I started trying to write fiction, and it's a lot harder. You got to have character arcs, and whatever. People have got to grow and change. It ended up that writing fiction is a lot harder, but it's kind of a different creative muscle, and I really enjoy both. So last year I had 2 novels and a nonfiction book that all came out in one calendar year, which was really neat because I love writing both, and it's totally different audiences. I mean, my sports book have obviously a heavy male audience. My romance novels do not, shockingly. And so I get to be 2 different people, literally, because I write the romance novels under a different name, not to hide it. I write under Savannah Carlyle. It's not a secret, but the online algorithms will like explode if you try to write in 2 very different genres for 2 very different groups of people. And so I get to be somebody else some days, and that's fun too.
Oh, that is fun. All right, now it's your turn. If you have a question, if you would come to the center aisle, we're going to have you ask the question on the microphone. So come on down. No, I got it. I'm not going to walk back and forth. I'm good. Come forward. I've been a professor for years. Uncomfortable silences do not deter me, so I will wait all day.
Thank you, Kristi. Kristi and I are classmates, so appreciate you coming. This may be sort of an idealistic take, but would love to get your take. We started the conversation talking about student athletes. It seems the world is moving into maybe they're athlete students, and perhaps even at these very elite tiers. Are they just athletes now? And have we commoditized it? You're talking about collective bargaining, making them employees of the university. Like, are they even students anymore? And is that good?
I have long said I believe the NFL and the NBA created this problem. The NCAA gets all the flack for it, but really there are, for sure, athletes who I've met who don't want to be in college. They don't want to be students. They don't value the education, at least right now. They think they can, they could come back and do it later maybe. But they're sort of forced to go to college because the other options, playing out of the country, there are other ways they could get into the NFL and the NBA, but they're not the best path. The best path is through college. And so there absolutely are athletes who are in college who have no desire to be there other than to play their sport. And I blame the NFL and the NBA because they have age eligibility rules that don't allow them to go straight into the pros. We never have this conversation about baseball players because baseball players can get drafted straight out of high school and go into the minor leagues. And so we've never had this conversation about them being exploited at the college level. The conversation is always around football and basketball players. And so I feel like the NFL and the NBA have gotten to sort of skate by and nobody blames them for it. And they get free development of their athletes, and there's no real reason for them to develop like a robust development league because they get colleges to do it for free. So it does frustrate me that and I don't blame the athletes. It frustrates me that some of them don't want to be there and are forced to. And I'm in a group of adjunct professors, and I saw a professor before Christmas saying that he was at a Power 4 institution and he had an athlete who was failing. And the academic advisor from athletics and the school's president got in touch with him and told him he needed to help this athlete pass this class. And he was asking if that happens to the rest of us. I actually had the opposite thing happen at Florida. I had a student who failed, but he had gotten really badly hurt, like second to last game of the season. I watched him get hurt on television, and I knew he had to have surgery, and I had reached out to him to tell him he could have extra time to complete his assignments because of that. And he hadn't answered me. And I copied his advisor and said, do you have an update on him? I want to make sure he gets this class finished up so I can give him, a real grade. And she was like, if he hasn't gotten back to you, fail him. I was like, okay. And I actually still have never heard from him. So he did fail my class. But I just feel like the ones who don't want to be there, why are we making them be there? And they sort of have to be because of the NFL and the NBA. So I blame them. Pressure the NFL and the NBA. I don't know. I've been saying that, but nobody else says it. So I don't think it's going to work. I think we're headed towards employment and collective bargaining. I think the sort of middle thing that could happen right now under U.S. law, you can't collectively bargain if you aren't employees. Congress could allow a form of collective bargaining that doesn't make college athletes employees, but does allow them to bargain for some of those things. If we need a middle of the road option, I kind of like that.
But that requires congressional action.
Yeah, which not going to happen.
Gotcha. Who's up?
Hi. I'm sure you're aware, but UGA sued on December 5th of last year Damon Wilson for almost $400,000 after he transferred to Mizzou, and he sued back. From what I can tell, there hasn't been like any update. Where do you see that going with NIL? And like, he hadn't been paid. My understanding is he hadn't been paid all of his NIL money. They're still suing him for all of it. What happens next, I guess?
So, good question. In these revenue sharing contracts, and they look different from one school to the next, but in many of these revenue sharing contracts, there are buyout clauses or other types of penalty clauses where if an athlete does transfer, they owe some amount back to the school they're leaving. And often that amount is larger than what they've received from the institution up to that date. The idea, I think, behind it was always that it would work more like coaches' contracts do, and that when you go to another school, that other school would pay the buyout. And in fact, in the NCAA's question and answer document that came out of the House settlement, there is a question about that. And they say that if another school pays the buyout, it counts against their rev share cap. So obviously the NCAA anticipated that these buyouts would happen. But a lot of attorneys for the athletes are arguing that these penalty clauses aren't valid. This isn't an employment situation, and that the amount that's being asked for isn't properly calculated in terms of the damage done to the institution. And the way some of them are worded, that would be sort of the legal standard, is that the amount would have to approximate the harm to the institution. Well, what kind of harm are you going to show? Are you going to say, well, we would have sold 20% more tickets if he'd played here, or we would have sold this many of his jerseys if he had played here? You know, trying to prove that value in court would be difficult, but there's several cases ongoing right now. There was another big one at Duke with Darian Mensah. There was another one that almost happened at Washington. I forget what that player's name was. It was close to the Georgia player's name, so I always get them mixed up. But he actually, when he found out they were going to enforce it against him, he decided to go back to Washington and not leave after all. So I think that contract was better written. But I see them all the time in rev share contracts that I review. To my knowledge, the only case that has been settled is the Darian Mensah case at Duke. They did agree to some sort of amount. I've heard from reliable sources that it's about $2 million, and they were trying to figure out how to structure it. Like, is he paying it or is Miami paying it? If Miami pays, it counts against their rev share, but if he's paying, he's probably really getting the money from what Miami's paying him, so shouldn't it still count against Miami's rev? So we don't know how that's going to count or not against Miami's rev share, but that was a settlement. They did sue and then pretty quickly came to a settlement, but that's the first case I know of where there was a settlement and the school being left is getting some money. So I think that's another kind of thing to keep your eye on going forward. Is I think we'll see more of that getting worked out over the next couple of years.
Who's next? Yes.
See, this is one of my Twitter friends, by the way. Sean and I have been friends on Twitter for a long time. I'm telling you, I meet some of the best people on Twitter.
You're very kind. My question is, where do we go from here? Because Florida, huge NIL budget. My school, Georgia Tech, not so huge. How do we deal with that disparity?
Yeah, that's a good question. And then you've got like Group of Five. I was just talking to a Group of Five AD the other day who was like, all of my top players are just going to get picked off every single year. I was at UNF yesterday and they were complaining about the number of players they've left. And they said basically schools are just going down the all conference list and picking off everybody on the all conference list. And we can't keep up with that. They were saying they're hoping next year they can share $500,000 total. That's what their budget looks like. And I don't think there's an answer for that. I think that the more, well-financed programs are going to continue to be able to essentially buy the best players. And, I've been on a bunch of coaching calls and webinars where they've talked about, how important it is to create a good team culture and to sort of, expose athletes to the academic and professional development opportunities and essentially why they should give up more money at another school to stay there. And there will be some people who will choose some sort of lifestyle or a school or an academic program over making a little more money somewhere else. But there's going to be a lot of them that are just going to take the biggest offer. And there's no real way to balance that or curtail it without there being some sort of rev share between schools, which I don't think is going to happen, or some sort of greater caps on especially that outside NIL money. But then that all comes back to the antitrust issues, and that would have to be collectively bargained. And even if athletes were employees and they were collectively bargaining, in none of the pro leagues is outside sponsorship money capped. Salaries are capped, but outside sponsorship money is not. So even if we had collective bargaining, would there ever be a situation where that outside NIL money would be capped? I don't think so. So I'm sad to say that I don't have a good answer. I hear a lot about there being sort of almost like the luxury tax in baseball, but I don't think that that's going to happen.
Hey, Kristi, thanks for being here. Dwayne Hanbury, class of '88, and I'm a commissioner of an NCAA Division III conference. And one of the things that we're concerned about at our level and here at Oglethorpe is the trickle-down effect. If the policies don't trickle down to us, certainly the ramifications of those policies do. And we were just at NCAA convention, and one of the things we did in Division III was we passed a resolution to study collectives, and the essence of the proposal or the resolution was to do away with them within Division III, not permit them. So we have major concerns about what is happening at Division I, and talking about student athletes potentially becoming employees. There is a pathway, as you mentioned, for collective bargaining to exist without the designation, but I'm also concerned that the easy way out is to just say student athletes are employees of their institution. If that were to happen, my biggest concern as an advocate for Division III is we can't exist in that world. We can't exist in a world where our student athletes are classified as employees, and all of a sudden varsity athletics becomes club sports or intramurals. What are your thoughts? If that were to happen, what is the worst case scenario, or is there a pathway for Division III to continue on its current path without being absorbed and basically eliminated by what we do now, which, in my opinion, what we do in Division III is the last bastion of pure collegiate athletic competition. We're what the NCAA wants everybody to think they are. That's what we do every day. So I'd be curious, is there a world, do you see a world where student athletes are classified as employees and yet Division III can still maintain what it does today?
Yeah, the employment question is interesting because of the factors that a court looks at in determining if athletes are employees or not. There's a control factor that I don't think looks a whole lot different across divisions in terms of controlling their schedules and that sort of thing, the amount of control that an employer has over an employee. I think that largely looks the same, but there's also a factor around revenue generation. And there's an argument by some, labor and employment is not my area of law, but I've talked to a lot of attorneys in that space, and they've said that there's an argument to be made that really only football and men's basketball players are employees and not any of the other athletes, which gets into some interesting arguments because the control's not really any different, just the revenue's different. So it kind of depends on how they become employees. I mean, what we've seen is football and men's basketball players trying to be declared employees and unionize. The good news is I don't think it's happening anytime soon because they were making really great strides in court and in front of the National Labor Relations Board prior to Trump being elected. And all of those cases were withdrawn as soon as he was elected because you're less likely to get favorable opinions for labor when a Republican's in office. This is not, I'm not, getting into politics here. It has nothing to do with Trump personally. It's when Republicans are in office, you see a less labor-friendly National Labor Relations Board. And so all those cases were withdrawn, including Dartmouth men's basketball athletes had just been found to be employees. And there's a whole nother issue with that where I think 5 players on the team were international athletes and can't be employees on student visas. So I think that it's going to be a while because it's not going to happen during this administration. I don't think it will happen during a Republican administration, period. And I don't think that it will move outside of Division I. The other thing that I've heard at some Division I AD meetings that I've been at is and I don't think this is happening either, but that one idea would be specifically with football to move football outside of college athletics, let the teams be privately owned, which would also allow you to bring an influx of capital into college football, that you would still pay the university for the use of their stadium and their licensing. So it could still be the Florida Gators. They could still play in the Swamp, but they wouldn't have to be students, and it would be a separate for-profit, private-run entity. That's not what I want to see for college football, so I'm not advocating for that, but I have heard it come up more than once, and that's a possible way to solve the problem, is moving them out of the system. I've only heard it for football. I don't know how that solves the problem with men's basketball. But I think that if they're declared to be employees, it's going to be pretty narrowly tailored, I think, around football and men's basketball in revenue generating programs. I hope.
All right. Well, you have, you're an author, both fiction and nonfiction. You have a social media presence. You're an attorney. You've done journalism. If you had to pick one of these to do for the rest of your life, what would it be? What's if you sort of, in your heart of hearts, how would you identify the rest of your career if you had to choose?
I would write books. I love writing. And my husband always says, if you win the lottery, what are you going to do? And I said, write and travel. And he was like, that's what you do. I'm like, but I wouldn't have to find anyone who would pay me for it. Wouldn't have to market my books. Wouldn't have to find somebody to pay me for freelance articles. I love writing, both the nonfiction and the fiction. So I would just write books.
Well, we have a motto here at Oglethorpe, which is make a life, make a living, make a difference. You're doing all three. Congratulations. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
As you know, reception immediately to follow. So I hope you will all stay and have some private conversation and get a chance to say hello and also enjoy some food. So thank you all for being here. It's good to see you.